As you can see, Mr. Parsons, 93, moves faster than me.
But we both have a stick.
Whoops! Whoa! Be careful, be careful, be careful. Good start.
That was the first time I've had a sideways introduction. Walking, normally you arrive and get there, and then you're introduced. And then introduced as I walk from the back, and you wonder what on earth was happening. It is lovely to see so many lovely, smiling faces, isn't it?
Who is here for the first time? A lot. Anyway, as you can see from the leaflet, we are a well-kept secret, but now I hope not from you. We've got lots of people. You've missed quite a few. But this week, we've got the Duke of Marlborough tomorrow, Julian Fellows on Wednesday, Maria Testino on Thursday, and next week we have Kirsty Young. So keep coming. After the summer recess, we've got everybody from John Major to Kate Moss to God knows who. But Brexit, who can we have? I mean, they're so boring. We'll have Farage. Farage has agreed to come, so we might ask him that. Now, listen, for those of you who don't know, what we do here is just an hour, not just a minute, just an hour. And I have a conversation with Nicholas Parsons, our guest, and I'm going to let you, the audience, ask him questions for about 35 minutes, 40 minutes, because the whole point about these forums is that you be given the chance to interact with our special guest. And I really am very delighted that Nicholas Parsons has come today because, frankly, you know, he's a hero, he's a national treasure. And I think that he's done the most extraordinary things. And so I'm going to start off. We were just talking inside. Apparently he knows this area quite well. And in the 50s, he used to trawl around Gerrard Street when there was only one Chinese restaurant. But he tells me that actually the center of activity was prostitution, and that there were prostitutes in Gerrard Street and then Lyle Street, and one was cheaper than the other. So I just wanted to know, Nicholas, how did you know that one was cheaper than the other? And what was the fare like, and how much were we talking about?
Well, I don't know, because I wasn't talking from personal experience. Fortunately, I was active enough to be able to get what I wanted without having to pay for it. And it's just that I was intrigued by all this. And you'd see these girls walking the streets, and I asked people what it was. And in fact, I was our stage manager of the play I was in at the time at the Aldrich Theatre called The Hasty Heart. And he was very knowledgeable about this, and that's what he told me. And then, of course, he went down to Bayswater. They were even cheaper, I was told.
We don't believe you for a moment. But round the corner...
No, who would want to? If you had the ability to attract a young lady just by your own personality, why would you want to pay for it and get some cheap slag? I mean, it was...
Well, because the prostitute might be more attractive than those who are attracted to you naturally. That's the whole point, isn't it?
I think the answer would be that they were more experienced.
Anyway, you also worked round...
I didn't come on here to talk about this.
You also worked round the corner of the Windmill Theatre. Tell us about the Lord Chamberlain who kept on wanting to come and inspect the censorship of these shows, which...
yes, I worked at the famous Windmill Theatre, and it's still there, but...
well, as a stripper.
I thought you said this was going to be a nice, gentle, warm interview. They didn't have male strippers. Anyway, they didn't actually have striptease there. It was a very gentle little show because the Lord Chamberlain's office existed then, and everything what went on in the theatre had to be passed by the Lord Chamberlain. And Vivian Van Dam, who ran it, was very shrewd because he had all these pretty girls. He was very shrewd at picking lots of different types of beauty. And he had lots of pretty girls there, but they had to be clad. I mean, the Lord Chamberlain had a rule whereby he didn't mind if people posed on the stage naked, as long as they were still. I didn't have any alcohol before I came on either. He didn't mind someone was naked, as long as they didn't move. Presumably he thought that was art, and if they moved, it was disgusting. And there was one famous occasion, because the big moment there was the fan dance. And he had a girl who didn't have any clothes on behind two huge fans like this. Then she'd do them this way, and then that way, and this way. And in fact, the comic, and I was there as resident comic for about 6 months, and you did a different show every 6 weeks. And we were in the wings waiting to come on, because the comic always followed the fan dance. And so I saw more nudity than anybody in the audience. For those who don't know about the Windmill, it was an amazing organization. We did 6 performances a day for 6 days of the week. And it was run like a cinema. And people would start queuing up with their furled umbrellas and hiding behind their newspapers because they didn't want to be recognized because it was rather naughty and risqué. And the first show was at noon, and it went on to 11 o'clock at night. And it was continuous, like a cinema performance. And as people got up from the front and left from the privileged seats, others from the back would rush down and grab them. So as you walked on to do your comedy turn, and they just stayed round to see the fan dance for the 3rd time, there'd be an awful lot of movement going on. One time I did a commentary, it was like a race commentary, to try and get them in the mood, and the jokes I was going to do. And it was an amazing experience. When I got the job, I was offered £36 for the week, and I was so excited. £36. I'd never had so much money. And then I worked out I was doing 36 shows. £1 a show. But it was an interesting experience. It was run really like a charming little review show, because it was quite tasteful in many ways. And it was only when the Lord Chamberlain's office went, of course they could do whatever they liked, and they'd have strip clubs opened up, and that was what killed the Windmill.
But you had always wanted to be an actor.
Yes.
Yet you were performing as a comedian. I mean, were you slightly frustrated, or what?
No. I was frustrated by my family, because I was brought up at a time when you didn't do what you wanted, you do what you were told. And I came from a very sort of well-connected, my father had very good antecedents. We've got a coat of arms, actually, somewhere, which might impress you, David. And
I want to see it.
It's on the ring there. No?
Oh, very good.
I read about it in your book. A wonderful book, you must buy it. Thoughts of Modern Living. It's such an entertaining, sophisticated, stylish book. And anyway,
your father was a GP.
He was a GP, first of all in Grantham and in Lincolnshire, and amongst his patients were the Roberts family, and Margaret Thatcher was young Margaret Roberts when she was young. And one journalist once took up, because they like to embroider on things, because he was a doctor to the Roberts family, they said that Dr. Parsons, Nicholas Parsons' father, actually brought young Margaret Roberts into this world. Well, of course, he wouldn't ever have talked about it. I think some people think if he did, he should have shoved her back again, but...
Whoa. Yeah.
But
and your mother was a nurse.
They met her, yes, at UCS Hospital. She was a staff nurse there. That's where he did his training.
Was there sexual harassment on your father's part to getting your mother as the nurse to be his wife?
I would never have thought about that.
Well, it happens
very
all the
interesting.
time now.
You meet Sir David and you get the most wonderful questions, don't they? Sexual harassment in the 1920s. Sexual harassment? Good heavens, no. I think she was very excited.
But I'll tell you what intrigued me. I mean, he's obviously a GP, and your mother was a nurse, yet you were born to write with your left hand, and they made you write with your right hand,
absolutely,
which is what my parents did to my brother, because he was born with a left hand and right. What on earth were they thinking? I mean...
but you see, Dave, that was the thinking at that time. My mother was the sort of driving force, and they thought everybody was left-handed. It was a bit odd. It's like the Latin word for left is sinister. And she thought, I've given birth to a sinister child. And she actually remember telling somebody in front of me, and she was proud of the fact. She said, I was horrified. I saw him when he started to draw something. He picked up the thing in his left hand. I thought, my God, I've given birth to the devil's child. And I grabbed the pen out of his hand, and I pushed it into his right hand, and I forced him to write like that. I mean, that was how you were brought up then.
Do you now write with your right hand?
I'm a bit sort of ambidextrous. I can do some things I concentrate on my right hand, some things I concentrate on my left hand. And for instance, I play squash left-handed. I bowl right-handed when I play cricket. I seem to do, and I notice one hand's for carrying and one hand's for opening. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. You usually carry one hand as a carrying hand, the other hand as a hand for doing this. Well, my left hand is the dominant hand, and that's the one I use for opening doors, and my right hand's the carrying one.
Well, you can use your left hand very googly for a Chinaman.
Yes, but I didn't bowl with my left hand. I wasn't very good.
Well,
I wasn't
if you bowled it with the left hand, you would be a Chinaman. Yes.
Can I stop it for a moment, David? Because I am so flattered to be interviewed by you, because to me, you are the epitome of the most sophisticated, cultured individual that we could possibly meet. You are absolutely amazing, isn't it?
You are very kind.
No, it's true.
We want to hear about more, because your parents actually wanted you to be an engineer.
Yes.
And you hated being an engineer. You've always wanted to be an actor. But in fact, you were put into that position because your parents thought that you were very good with your hands, and
That's
you
right.
became a mechanical engineer, and you're now a great collector and a very competent watch.
No, not watches.
Clocks, yeah.
I happened to make a program, the Marie Antoinette watch, which was about clocks and watches.
But there were two tales. Tell us both.
Well, it started because at least my father occasionally, he was a very busy general practitioner, but he had a patient. And I used to do a lot of DIY for my mother. I had lots of tools they gave me. And I've always been, I see it being creative with your hands. I was always able to make things, do things, repair things. And my father had a patient whose hobby was repairing grandfather clocks. And he died. And his widow said to my father, look, these big clocks in the billiard room I'm going to sell, but I've got 2 trunks full of bits and pieces of old clocks and parts and so forth. I don't know what to do with them. And he said, well, my son's very capable with his hands. Ship them up to our house. We have an attic there. And so they brought up. He engaged a clockmaker to come in and show me how to take them apart and repair them. And I became quite adept at doing that. And I still have about half a dozen clocks which I reassembled and made go. One particular one which I'm proud of is what my father always called the Cromwell Clock, which is actually a lantern clock of the Cromwellian period. And I remember my father had it. I remember I grew up with it. It had incredible chime. And one day I came up to the house. It wasn't going. I said, Dad, you can't have that beautiful clock. They're not going. Oh, it became very old. It doesn't really matter. I won't be here much longer anyway. So anyway, I took it away. I took it apart, cleaned it, brought it back, and it's kept perfect time ever since. And one of the charming things about this is my father said to me one day, he said, I'm so delighted you're having what he called the Cromwell Clock, because it was the very first thing I bought when I went up to Cambridge, and it cost me 7 shillings and 6pence. It's now worth about a couple of £1,000. It's an amazing comment. So it's clocks, and that's what that program I did, which has been, I'm delighted to say, very successful. It started off with, called A Matter of Time, with my interest in clocks, taking them apart and repairing them, and talking about the clocks that I have at home and elsewhere, and some I've given away to members of the family. And then they discovered, when we went to France, to the great Breguet man, the great inventor of watches and so forth, this incredible story about this amazing watch, the Marie Antoinette, which took him 4 years to make. It's got every kind of sophistication you could think of. And anyway, so they then called they changed the title of the film and called it The Story of the Marie Antoinette. And of course, it was made by Breguet in France for Marie Antoinette. She never got it. She was in the guillotine before she received it. And then it was bought by somebody, and then bought by somebody else, and then it finished up in a museum in Jerusalem. So we went to Jerusalem to film it, It's now worth millions. It's the most unique timepiece in the world.
But I don't understand. Did she, I mean, the legend was that she went up to the guillotine with this watch, but now you're saying that they didn't give it to her because they thought, what a waste that would be. And
No, it's like, I interrupt you. It wasn't finished by then.
Oh, I see.
She had a number of his watches.
You said 4 years. I thought it was 44 years because, in fact, when it wasn't finished, it was sort of left for another 30 years before it was finished. I mean, she was, guillotine 1793, so the watch was supposed to have been finished in 1830s.
Yeah, the story is that a certain Austrian nobleman came and said, I'd like you to make a watch, and money's no object. I wanted to tell the time, wanted to go for 24 hours a day, I wanted to tell the weather, the thing, this, that, and the other. And he gave this immediate commission, and he worked on it, and then Marionette died. She did have a number of his watches. And then, of course, she died, and he then, as he connected with the royal family, had to get out of the country and went back to Switzerland, where he was born, and took the thing with him. After the revolution, he came back and settled in Paris and opened up his shop again, started working on this amazing timepiece, so he was interested. And it took him 4 years. And then he advertised it. Somebody came in and bought it. And then it went...
A Jew?
Yes, I think it was... no, it wasn't, funnily enough.
When you saw it in Jerusalem, who owned it? Was it in a museum?
It was in a museum. What had actually happened, it had gone... this fellow, a certain English nobleman had bought it, and he'd given it to the museum over there, and a master thief broke into the museum and stole it. And this is the romantic part of the story. And whether he thought, I'm never going to sell it, because they got the best brains in detective work onto it, they never found it, and they never found where it went. So it was hidden. For 25 years, it had disappeared, and everybody thought, it's gone. And then one day, a jeweler in Jerusalem got a call from a woman who said, I've got some things that my husband's left me, and I'd like to come in and talk to you about them, because I want to sell them. He's dead. And when he brought them in, he recognized the famous Marie Antoinette watch, which had disappeared. And he phoned up the museum and said, I think I've got the watch. The curator came down and burst into tears. It was returned, it had disappeared, and now it's back. And of course they questioned her, but she found she was innocent. And so went back to the museum, and it had actually disappeared for 25 years. So it's a very romantic story, and it is the most beautiful watch in the world. And I actually held it in my hand, and the wonderful thing about the film was they had all kinds of security all around it and the cameras, and I held it in my hand, and it started going again. It was amazing. I've had so many letters about this film, and somebody said, it must have been so emotional for you when you actually held the watch. I said, yes, but you have to remember, I had security guards around me, I had 4 camera crew, and the camera's right on the thing, and I have to concentrate on talking to the camera and making sense of what we were talking about. So you can't exactly get emotional to the extent that you start to burst into tears or something.
What's the basic difference between the mechanics of a watch and a clock? I mean, presumably your clocks, are they all pendulums?
Yes.
So
no, the carriage clocks are not. They're fusees and barrels.
Do you prefer pendulum or...
Oh, I love a grandfather clock, where you've got the pendulum and you wind it up and you work on it.
Do you know the formula for a swing of a pendulum?
Oh, yes, I learnt it when I was doing physics at the university. I've forgotten it now because I hated it.
2 pi square root of L over G.
Well, that's it, well done.
It's a very good formula. And that's why it moves perpetually, because of gravity and this extraordinary constant core arc and the length and gravity. But with these clocks, do you still have them around your house? So when you enter your house, when you go back home tonight, do you hear tick-tock everywhere?
No, because we've been away for a few days, most of them have stopped.
Oh.
I then knew, I said to Anne, my wife, I said, I'm going to go on clock patrol. And then you wind them all up. Because the two or three of them, I have to wind them every night. But I enjoy doing that. They're very much part of my life. And I do think this Cromwell is it's such a loud chime, you can hear it around the house. And I heard it as a child all around the house. And it'll go on to my son, and he'll hear it when his grandchildren hear it. It's been very
I have to let you know that for Chinese, we can never give away a clock, because a clock is exactly the same sound as death. So when you give a clock away, you're giving away death. So it is the one article that Chinese never give away. And on one occasion, the Prince of Wales gave me a clock, but I was too greasy to tell him not to give it to me, and I just took it. But about 10 years later, I explained to him that it was not bad, it was bad feng shui, and I had to give him back £1 in order to pretend that I bought it. But obviously, you don't have such superstition.
Well, I didn't even know he existed. But,
yeah. Well, if you didn't like anybody, you give him lots of clocks.
The reason my best friend from university days has died before his natural time, because I gave him one of my clocks. Yes.
That proves.
Well, there you are.
Proves that we Chinese are very clever.
I better speak to my children and say, you remember that clock I gave you? Will you please give me 50p for it? Yeah.
I want to ask about your two very famous programs, because I grew up with them. Even though I didn't know about Just a Minute until a bit later, because in the 60s, I think it was first broadcast in 1967, I couldn't speak English, but I do remember Sale of the Century. Oh. I mean, I was glued to television because I was desperate for those prices. So who came up with the whole concept of Sale of the Century?
It's an American show, and I'd done a lot of theatre work. I'd starred in the West End. I had 15 months in Boeing and Say Who You Are with Prunella Scales and others. And it was, and I was established right now. My childhood ambition was to be an actor, a comedy actor, which is what I was doing. And then suddenly the chief producer at Anglia Television phoned up and said, we've got a program, an American one. Have you ever thought of doing a quiz? And I'm a great one for doing lots of different things. If someone offers me a challenge of a different kind of show, I always say yes. I love to expand my talents and spread them over a broader spectrum if I can. So he said, well, meet me at the office in London. And he showed me a thing called Sale of the Century with a very laid-back American asking some very simple questions, and we're getting huge prizes, which, of course, they're doing that now in our country because they've changed it, because at the time, you know, there was a limit to what prize you could give away. And the top prize couldn't be more than £1,000. Anyway, Peter Joy, that was his name, said to me, well, that's the show. And I said, but Peter, I couldn't do that. That's not me. He said, well, we want you to do it. We'd like to engage you to present it, so you find your way of doing it. And I said, well, I am an actor. I believe in the sense of getting drama going. So let's ask some simple questions to begin with to get them relaxed. And then in the last sequence, I'll write some very snappy questions, and we'll put a lot of pace in them. And so we get some drama. And it worked very well. And it took off. The show became incredibly successful. In fact, it became the most successful quiz show on television ever. At one point, we had 21 million viewers. And it actually killed me professionally, because at that time, which was the 70s, the press particularly looked down on quiz shows. Oh, they were down market. They used to write them off, and I got the most terrible press. We used to say, the journalists used to say the most awful things about me. The man who spits out the questions and shouts at the contestants, which I never did. I used to go and chat to them beforehand to get them in a relaxed mood. And it was because they wanted to try and raise the sights of the viewing public. And nowadays, of course, they accept quizzes for what they are. They criticize it for being a good quiz or not. But then they were just slagged. And in fact, when they eventually took it off, after 14 successful years, it was like beginning all over again. I had a hell of a job getting any work. Oh, he was a quiz show host. He can't act. It's as if something you can do when you've done all your life, you've just lost. And I had to struggle back in again. I took a very odd job in a program called Night Network. A friend of mine phoned up. He said, Nicholas, we've got a program we're doing on LWT. It's going out from 11 o'clock at night till 3 in the morning. It's called Night Network. Have you ever thought of doing a television show for Radio Money? And I said, well, at the moment, I'll be happy to do anything. And so I saw it. And they had a weird game called the All New Alphabet Game, which I ran for them. And this took off as well. And slowly, I built up a following amongst the youth. And I got a whole new thing. And the comic strip asked me to do something with Rick Mayall and Aid Edmondson called Mr. Jolly Lives Next Door. Did anybody ever see it? It's a strange... My wife hated it. And it was...
Who is over 70 here? Well, there it is. Do you remember that show?
No.
Oh, well, there it is.
No, it was offbeat. It was a very much a youth-orientated
But
show.
that was your greatest fear, wasn't it? That nobody would ring up to ask you to do things.
It is your greatest fear as an actor. I mean, there's no truer remark than you're only as good as your last job. We're a bit like rogues and vagabonds and prostitutes.
When was the last time you had a phone call asking you to do something?
Yesterday.
What was it about? Was it a return to the Windmill Theatre?
No, it was to do with my one-man comedy show. And was I free on social
Which you put on at Edinburgh Festival?
No, that's a different show I do up there.
Well,
I'm very eclectic. I have lots of different things. Up there I do a thing called the Nicholas Parsons Happy Hour, in which I do a lot of stand-up comedy, and then I have guests. And so, of course, I do after dinners, so that's jokes. And but
after dinner, you held for a moment the Guinness Book of Record for the longest after-dinner speech for 11 hours and 22 minutes.
Yeah.
What the bloody hell did you talk about?
Well, it occurred because a charity called Action Research for the Crippled Child were running a thing called records. And if you got a record, you go into the Guinness Book of Records. And I went to watch my friend Giles Brandreth talk he talked for about 3 or 4 hours somewhere. And they said, well, Nicholas, what are you going to do for us? And I said, well, I suppose the only one thing I can do is talk. They said, but Giles has got the record. Well, don't worry. We'll set up another dinner somewhere, and we'll get the audience in. And they set it up at some college of further education. And I talked for 7 hours. And it was quite impressive. And you had the dinner there, the group of people. They all fell asleep. And others would come in and pay to see you for a bit. And I got the record. Now, Giles is one of the most competitive people you could ever meet. He's lovely. He's one of my best friends, and I really love him. And but Giles, he couldn't bear not to have the record. So they phoned up, and they said, we thought maybe we should have a sort of challenge and set up a thing where you in one room and Giles in another room at the Hyde Park Hotel, and you can go for the after-dinner record. And what I discovered was that you take a different approach. I kept recycling things as people would arrive who hadn't been before. I said, oh, by the way, just up until then, and I went through some of the stuff I'd done before. I went through all my old cabaret material, my review material. I just talked, I just waffled. I made a most out of the fact that Giles, they phoned me up and just before we started, said, Giles is very worried about the calls of nature. And so and if you're going to go for a long time, and Giles is very competitive, could you please go to the big chemist, John Bell and Croydon, in Wigmore Street, and be fitted? So I went there, and went in there, and I didn't know what was going to happen. This man said, oh, yeah, it's kind of, very old-fashioned. Would you like to walk this way? And I thought of the old music hall joke, if I walked that way, I wouldn't need a contraption. And then he put me in a cubicle. He said, I'll get somebody to go and get the contraption for you. And then a little while later, the curtain went back. He said, try that on for size. And I thought, what the hell is going on? So I called him back. I said, will you please explain to me about this? Well, he said it's an astronaut bag, actually. And he showed me how to fit it to your thigh. And then there's a hole where it doesn't really matter. And I put it on, and I found that actually once your adrenaline's pumping, the waterworks seem to dry up a bit. But actually what happened, it slipped. And I told them this story, which made them laugh. And I said, oh, by the way, that contraption I'm talking about, it slipped. And then I kept up running commentary about how it was slowly slipping down my leg until it got to the ground. And when it was on the ground, I picked it up and showed it to everybody. So we kept going. And what actually happened was I got a message. He said that at the 11th hour, we're going to call it an honourable draw. They were worried that one of us, as we're very naturally competitive, wouldn't give in. And they might have someone collapse, which wouldn't be good for the charity. So at the 11th hour, it was called an honourable draw. I felt absolutely ghastly afterwards. For the whole week, I felt terrible. And but Giles is so competitive, he couldn't bear not to have the record to himself. And so he went for it again and got it in for 12 hours. And good luck to him, he can have it. I did my bit. We raised a lot of money for that.
I mean,
charity.
I thought Castro was bad, but I mean, he pales into insignificance. But now I want to ask you my favorite program of all time. I mean, I have enjoyed Just a Minute in all my years, and if I had only 1 minute to live, I would have one of your highlights. And you have now run that for, I don't know, over 50 years. And that must have given you enormous pleasure. Who do you think has been the best at Just a Minute?
You know, whenever I do my show and I take questions, somebody always says, who's your favorite?
I didn't say your favorite.
No,
I'm asking you the best.
You don't have a best, because it's a very, and it would be invidious if I said that, because I work with all these wonderful, talented people. And if it looked as if I favored one against the other, or preferred one to the other, I think it would be invidious. So there's some 1 or 2 people are very good at the game, like Paul Merton, who's absolutely brilliant at it, and he's in it nearly all the time. Giles Brandreth, who's brilliant at the game. And
Kenneth Williams.
Oh, Kenneth Williams is brilliant in his own way, but utterly different.
Clement Freud.
He was very clever and very erudite and did it very well indeed, and not very humorous, but he was very clever. You see, if you can do it, you find your own way of doing it, because some people come on and it is such a fiendishly difficult game that even if you've got a lot of talent, sometimes people can't quite assess it. We had one person on who should be nameless, who came on, who was a brilliant intellectual, and he came on, and he'd obviously decided this was a game. And it isn't a game. It's a matter of fun. And I try to orchestrate it so we have fun. And I think it's the fun which is its element of success. Because the more challenges there are, the more excitement we have and the more amusement. And he had worked it out. He slowed down his delivery, went very slowly, a bit like Clement Freud did. And then he would also win, and he was determined to win. But he was utterly humorless and boring, and it nearly killed the bloody show. And the sad thing is, he's a lovely, lovely person. Afterwards, he said, well, I did enjoy that. I do hope you'll ask me back again. I said,
which you never. But now, before I open up, who would like to try just once to stand up with Nicholas Parsons judging you, with my clocking you, and to speak without interruption, repetition, and hesitation for 1 minute? Who would be game enough to do that? Come on. One of you, a volunteer. No, not me. Go on. Go on.
No, it's not embarrassing. What I do is...
just one volunteer.
No,
all right, okay.
Come up here.
You
Come
try.
up here.
Yeah, give her a microphone.
No, come up here.
Come up here.
Come up.
Come up here.
Come up here and stand beside me, my love.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Now Nicholas Parsons takes over. Okay.
So do I stand up as well? Because
No, you sit down. She can
all right,
stand
okay,
down.
my love. Okay.
I'm going to clock it.
No, you come and stand beside me.
Okay, all right.
Now, what we do to help you is stand down there, my love. Don't be nervous. You think...
Maybe that's what I can talk about, being nervous.
Right. Well, you choose your subject, which you know something about, so that you'll have confidence. What would you like? Being nervous?
No, living on a boat.
Living on. So we'll put your microphone
Okay.
up there. And, now, what we do is I will let you know if you slip up, but you keep going. And then we'll
Okay.
find out how long you go and how many mistakes you make. So what is your name?
Lindsay.
Lindsay. So, Lindsay, will you talk on being on a boat for 60 seconds if you can, and your time starts now.
Good afternoon.
Hesitation.
Good afternoon.
No,
Repetition. Sorry.
Repetition.
I live on a boat. She's a beautiful, bright orange with yellow gold rails, 65-foot narrow boat, and I've been on her for over 21 years. I had brought my son up on Sarissa.
Hesitation again, carry on.
Sarissa. And I...
Hesitation and carry on.
I travel...
Repetition.
Continuous cruiser on the rivers, the canals, all over this country, predominantly in London. But at the moment, I'm in...
Hesitation.
I can't remember where I am now. Where am I? Enfield, just by Enfield Lock. And I absolutely adore it. My friends are in the audience. Jez Codd also has a boat called Bonnie Lass.
Repetition of boat, carry on.
Joel Sanders has a gorgeous narrow called Herbie too, I believe. No, sorry.
All right.
Are we
1
done?
minute.
1 minute.
Wow.
Well, I thought that was very brave, and she hesitated 5 times and deviated a number of times. It just shows you how difficult it is, and that those who can play it well is incredibly skilled. I will be listening, concentrating extremely hard, and maybe Paul's got the subject, and he's going, and I sense as he's coming up to a word that he wants to use again, he's already used it, and he'll suddenly switch and find some other way to express that thought. It's an incredible skill, and it's amazing how it's taken off. We have over the years, we used to have 4 regulars, which was Kenneth Williams and Peter Jones and Derek Nimmo, our mutual friend, and Clement Freud. And it was getting a bit predictable. And I think it would have died a natural death, because around that time, in the 60s or 70s, there were other shows called My Music and My Word, which had 4 men and a chairman. And they died a natural death, because people had got too used to them. But slowly they died off, those regulars. We brought in different people, and now we don't always have the same 4 people in any show. And we've changed the rules subtly. I brought in all kinds of alterations, like giving bonus points out and hesitation and things like that. Well, the hesitation was there, but benefit of the doubt. And so that if you're in our profession, if you want to achieve any longevity, you can't relax on it. You have to keep aware of it and think about it. Sometimes my wife says to me, "Why are you listening to the show? You were in it." And I said, "I know, but my thinking when I'm doing it is quite different when I'm listening to it." And I listen to it, and I do pick up little nuances, which I've conveyed to the producer again, and I watch that so that we don't commit those little petty crimes again, so that the thing will continue to go and entertain and be amusing. And by the way, can I just add, we haven't done 50 years yet. This Christmas is the 50th anniversary.
So that I can tell you, I've done my homework, 22nd of December.
Absolutely right. And I did the original pilot. I'm still doing the same job. It's ridiculous.
But in fact, you can exaggerate a bit, because you have actually done it over 6 decades. Because you didn't start, because you started in 1967. So you've actually done it over 50 years, in a sense that you've done it over 6 decades. And the 22nd of December this year will be technically your 50th anniversary, with 6 decades of appearance, but there it is. So I hope
David,
that
you're not
22nd of December will be a special day for you, and we'll be able to listen to it. I always listen to it in my bath, so I look forward
Can
to
I
it.
ask you, does it make any difference if you're in the bath? Does it?
Yes, it does. It makes me very excited.
Really?
I can play with my rubber duck. Who has got a question for Nicholas Parsons? Yes, these two. 1 minute. Just use that microphone.
Sorry, a great man retired last week, Mr. Henry Blofeld. Do you feel you could take his place on Test Match Special as a summariser?
Do you speak English as well?
I do indeed.
I missed the last bit about...
Sorry, Henry Blofeld has retired, the great sage of cricket. Do you feel you could...
He's 77. I don't know why he's retired.
Well,
They said it's got something to do with his eyes or something. I'm 93. I'm still going
you're
strong.
a great lover of cricket. I know that. You do a lot of work.
Oh, I love cricket, yes.
I know. You do a lot of work for the Lord's Taverners.
That's right, I do. I'm a great Lord's Taberner.
Do you feel you could replace him?
Hmm?
Do you feel you could replace him?
They wouldn't
What
ask
is he
me.
retired from?
A commentary. He's a commentator.
Commentary.
Oh, yes. But
I'm
you
very
don't do
into-
commentary, do you?
No, I don't do commentary.
No.
And anyway, they wouldn't ask me because I'm not in that realm. I mean, even if at charity matches, I've commentated.
He's
but-
not MCC. He's the Lord Taverner, for God's sake.
But you've got to realize, it's one of those things, but it's a very specialized profession. So if they chose someone else in Blowfield, they'll find somebody who's already been associated with cricket all his life. They're not, even though I have in an amateur sense.
Wait. Let's
Right.
watch.
Sorry, I misunderstood your speech. Right.
Hello.
Hello.
Unless I misheard you, did you say you did your degree in physics?
Hmm?
Did you do a degree in
Engineering.
engineering?
Yes.
So why did you choose engineering?
Oh, I didn't.
Oh.
I was told to do it.
Okay.
I mean, when I was a little boy, I always wanted to be an actor from the earliest age. My parents thought I was an odd, because I was always fooling about and trying to make people laugh. And they used to say, no, we've got an odd one here. I don't know where he came from. And when I said, at the age of 16, the parents said, well, what are you going to do when you leave school? And I said, well, you know, there's only one thing I've ever wanted to do. I want to be an actor. And my father's reaction was very succinct and very typical of the time. He said, well, don't be ridiculous. My father was very much like that, very aristocratic. He said, that's not a proper job. You can't do anything like that. No, you've got to get a career, something like that. And my mother was horrified, because though she used to love going to the theatre, she thought everybody in the theatre was either debased, debauched, or degenerate. And she thought someone as weak and ineffective as me would probably finish up as an alcoholic pervert in the gutter or something. I said to her one day, I said, Mother, I don't understand. You actually admire people like Laurence Olivier and Peggy Ashcroft and Sybil Thorndike. But I mean, do you think they're like all those people you describe? She said, no. But isn't it a pity they have to work with those sort of people? So I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere. I mean, actually, it was incredible, because I've always been capable of my hands, as I've just described to you. And it was my uncle, who's got connections in Glasgow, got in touch with some relations. They said about that. They got in touch with some friends. And the next thing is they spoke to a firm on Clydebank that made pumps and turbines called Drysdales. And the next thing is, during the war, 16 years and a few months, I was on a train going up to Glasgow, straight from an English public school, talking very much more like that than I do today, and I was straight on to Clydebank. Well, I said, I say, you come here, we'll teach you who to get your effing horn steady. This is life, you know, they're going to live it. So I said, I bet. But I never changed the way I spoke. And somehow I managed to make a rapport, and I survived. How I survived, goodness only knows. I think, actually, somebody asked me that question once, and I think it's the embryonic actor in me. Because, you know, you need to make a rapport with an audience. Make contact with them as I walked out here and get them on your side. And I realized I had to make these people my friends, otherwise I was going to be crucified. And somehow I did. And I was accepted. I mean, there was one time they came to me and said, hey, Nick, I got to ask you a question. Are you a boss's man? And I sensed what they were after. I said, oh, no, I don't know the bosses at all. I mean, good heavens, they got me the job. I don't know them well. He said, oh, that's okay, Nick, because, I mean, you're all right, you're mucking, you're prepared to get your hands steady like that. But if you were a boss's man, you'd be out. You'd be finished. We'd crucify you.
Okay,
I mean,
next.
surviving under those conditions, which I did, and one of the few things in life I'm proud of.
Yeah, two things briefly. You've also been a really good straight man, which to many of the big comics in the 60s,
That's
which
right.
is an underrated, position, I think. But also, I don't think you have missed one single episode of Just a Minute in all those years you've been doing it. So have you written a biography?
Yes, I've written a biography.
Autobiography.
An autobiography. And I've written
Just a Minute.
some memoirs. No, that one was...
About hesitation.
and then did the memoirs, which was Nicholas Parsons, well, Hesitation, Repetition, or Deviation. And I've written another book about Just a Minute, which is still available in the shops, called Welcome to Just a Minute, giving the whole history of the show with all the funny things that have happened and the interesting and creative things as well.
Next time, please do some homework before you ask. Next
And
question.
Hello, thank you for a wonderful evening.
It's not over yet, darling.
I was just saying hello, I couldn't see you properly. It's such a gift to be able to make so many people laugh, but who makes you laugh?
Oh, I love comedy, and I'm analytical about it. I can look at, I watch comedians, and some of them I say, well, yeah, he's funny, but it's not my sort of things. I tell you who I do like very much at the moment, Carol, what's her name? Mrs. Brown's Boys. I mean, I think it's not very kosher, not very sort of politically correct, but it's amazing. I mean, it really is very funny. She's very clever, and she does slapstick as well. And oh, sorry, it's my wife having a private conversation. I mean, in the past, I was in much Binding in the Marsh. I loved Richard Murdoch and Kenneth Horne, and their sort of humour. And who are the other people I admire very much? Arthur Haynes when I worked with Arthur Haynes as a comedian, I was with him for 10 years. And that was the turning point in my professional life. That was one of his characters, Oscar Pennyford. That's how I got the job, yes. It was 1956, and independent television had just begun. And George Black announced that he was going to make a new show called Strike a New Note, which was the title of his father's famous wartime show, which discovered Sid Field and Terry Thomas and Zoe Gale and the Barnard Brothers. And he said, I'm going to discover, I remember the phrase, new and unknown stars of independent television. And I desperately wanted to be one of them. It didn't happen. And I'd done quite a bit by then, and it could have well been that I would have been asked. It didn't. And I happened to watch the first show, and it was really terrible. Absolutely appalling. There was only one person in it who was, I thought, rather good. He had awful material called Arthur Haynes. And I remember saying to my wife at the time, I said, he's got talent, but shows are terrible. I happened by chance to see it the following week. It was even worse. And the following morning, my agent phoned me and said, have you seen a program called Strike a New Note? And I said, yes. Isn't it absolutely diabolical? He said, they want you to join it. I said, when do I begin? We don't, and they really wanted me he had a character called Oscar Pennyfeather, in which he mimed to an unseen voice. And the voice wasn't right. And they wanted me to come in and do that. And I used to do some stand-up and introduce things. I can remember some of the jokes I first told there. I don't want to tell them again now, because I don't think we've got time, have we?
No. Tell us a joke.
Well, I'll tell you the very first joke I ever told on television. And it was I've forgotten it now. Yes, it was about this chap who was a very keen betting man, and he had a system. He always backed a horse with the colour yellow in the name. He made quite a bit of money doing that. Then one day, he'd do a horse in a sweepstake called the Yellow, and it won for him. From then on, he was obsessed with the colour yellow. So he painted his house yellow, outside and inside, did everything yellow, yellow furnishings, yellow fittings, yellow carpets, yellow curtains, everything. Then he did the bedroom all yellow, yellow curtains, yellow carpets, yellow bedspread, yellow bed, yellow sheets, yellow pillowcases, everything. And then he died. It was very sad. He got jaundice and they couldn't find him.
Good evening, Nicholas.
Good evening, my darling.
I adore you.
And I love you for saying it.
I love to listen to your voice on the radio and this wonderful joie de vivre that you have.
Oh, yes.
And in this world where comedy can sometimes be a little bit cruel and cynical, I wonder if you could just share with us that joie de vivre, the attitude that you have to making people laugh and making people happy.
You want to come up here and I'll give you a kiss?
I would love to.
No, it's all right. I was thinking. Where's the chair? Oh, it's there. Yeah, you didn't tell me we were going to have those bonuses in the show.
You'll be charged.
Right. Well, what was the
Joie
question?
de vivre.
Well, I mean, you are yourself. It's yourself. You have to give of yourself. I mean, we were talking about comedians. Some comedians are very lugubrious, but they play on that to get it. I mean, Tony Hancock, who was a brilliant, to me, he was one of the greatest timers of a comedy line. Sometimes the lines he said weren't even funny, but he made them funny. But he played on the fact that he was I met him and worked with him for a time, very melancholic character. And it was the melancholy in his nature that he drew on to create that fellow from Railway Cuttings East Cheam, you know. And so people have different ways. Some are very exuberant and over the top, and they're very extravagant. You find what is your particular style and forte, and you play to that. Okay?
Next.
Don't be frightened of it, darling. It helps.
Good evening. Of your roles as an actor...
Could you speak into the microphone, darling? It'll help. Right.
As your roles as an actor, comedian, quiz show host, is there anything that you have as an unfulfilled ambition? Is there
Yes,
anything
I would like to have done... I have a production company, and I made 1 or 2 short films for the cinema when they were taking what were called shorts in between. They had to. And I would like to have done far more directing. I directed 1 or 2 plays for Derek Nimmer when he sent out to...
And produced them.
And produced them. And I do... It's using the knowledge you have to impart it to others and direct it and orchestrate it. And I realized that if I was going to concentrate, it's such a specialized business ours, if I was concentrating on being a director, you know, maybe on the films or on the stage, I'd have to forget about acting. And I do enjoy acting. I'm a bit of an old show-off. I was frustrated as a little boy from acting, and I'm still trying to say, I think, you know, a psychologist might say, you're still trying to say, Mummy, look at me, is that it? You know, and still trying to gain attention and entertain people. I enjoy making people laugh. It gives me huge satisfaction and pleasure. And if I was to be a director, you're an unseen person. But creatively, you're doing something much, much more interesting.
Have you ever acted a villain? I mean, have you...
Oh, yes. They are the easiest parts of all to act. I was in a film called The Dark Side of the Moon or something, and I had to play this really sinister character. I'd done quite a lot of films, and this one. And the first time I've ever been cast, he was a very smooth villain like that. And you know, those villains are the easiest parts in the world to play. And I was playing him like that. He was really sinister. An awful character. My wife is laughing. You recognize something there? I'm never like that at home, darling. No.
All right, another question.
We're talking about films.
Yeah, one in the back and one back up here. Yeah, the back first.
I don't think anyone that would see you now would imagine that you're in your 90s, Nicholas. What keeps you so young in your mind and everything?
Using it. It's very important. I'm a great believer in this, and I think it could be borne out by specialists, because I'm a bit weak in my legs, and that's why I have a stick just in case I stumble. It's called balance. But my brain, I'm obviously younger than my years, And I just believe that you should keep using your brain in whatever way. I mean, if you're at home and not doing anything, I've seen people who retired from other sedentary jobs, and then they just pot around the garden and things, and they fade away when they're about 60 or 70. You must keep using your brain. It keeps you active, it keeps your mind, it keeps you going. And I'm lucky that I'm in a show where I have to use my brain so intensely, which is just a minute, that I say sometimes I'm very lucky that I've got a job which is helping to keep me young.
Do you still have sexual desires?
I can be... Absolutely. I mean, what about you?
When? Me,
I mean, it doesn't go.
I got male menopause. But
I mean, the answer to the question, it's a bit of an effort to fulfill any function. You know, things...
No, but I'm not talking about desire. I mean, when was the last time you passed a very beautiful girl whom you found rather attractive, like all those years ago when you might have walked down Gerrard Street or Lyle Street?
I look round here and I see all these beautiful women. I mean, I'm very moved by female beauty. It means a lot, and I love it when people make the best of themselves and put on nice clothes and maybe a little bit.
I mean, you're a picture of respectability and decency. Have you ever sort of leafed through a Penthouse or a dirty magazine?
Sorry, can you explain that one?
Well, I just wondered. I mean, it's the sort of thing that ordinary people do, but you are such a paradigm of respectability. I just wonder whether behind that veneer of the net curtain that in fact sinister things happens,
no.
like you're being left-handed.
No, nothing sinister. No. I mean, very, very provocative and forward. I mean, in my youth, I would see a pretty girl and I would chat her up, yes. I don't think I had a very good chat-up line, but I didn't have all the success I would have liked. But
what was your first chat-up line to your wife?
I'm not a sort of...
licentious character.
No, it's not that. I don't think I am the physical type that women go for. They may...
Well, I don't know. Look at that picture. I mean, that must have been, what, 30, 40, 50 years ago?
I love talking to you. You really are.
All right, let's have last question.
Sorry. Nicholas, I remember many years ago in the 80s, Just a Minute was on TV with ITV.
That's right.
Did you ever think of contemplating putting it on TV?
Well, I've always wanted to go on television, and the BBC radio didn't really want it. They wanted to keep it to themselves. But I think they actually blew it because they put it on. You'd be surprised to know that some of the people who make decisions creatively are not always they're not always the best. The ones at the top are, yes. But when I was younger, for instance, if you had an idea, I knew the head of comedy and radio, and I'd phone him up, and I'd say, Roy, I got an idea about something, which I sold Just a Minute to them. He said, well, come in and talk to me about it. I explained the idea. I like that, yes, we'll go with it. No, I don't think it's going to work. And you're finished. Nowadays, you have to submit an idea. It goes through half a dozen commissioning agents, commissioning producers, it's called, and eventually it may see the light of day. I mean, I had one perfect example. I thought of a wonderful radio idea called How Comedy Changed a Nation, because it was during the war when the government were trying to keep morale up by making lots of comedy shows, encouraging the BBC to do as possible. But suddenly, comedy then was reaching out to people. And so people were listening to comedy, and they were made aware of all kinds of people from different walks of life. And so the nation became more cosmopolitan in that sense. And in a way, I think this comedy changed people's attitudes. And that's why immediately after the war, everybody voted Labour, because they wanted a change from the traditional Tories who had been in power for so long. And they thought it was a great insult to Winston Churchill. In one way it was, but they didn't realize. And so I had this idea, and I thought it was a very interesting one. And it was rejected on the basis that, we've got enough shows about radio. And I happened to be in the office of the head of light entertainment, And I said, I'm so disappointed they've turned this idea down. And he said, what idea, Nicholas? And I explained it to him. He said, that's a fabulous idea. Oh, it's commissioned. And so we got it right away, as it used to be in the old days. And it's very interesting. Things change, and you have to go with the system. And it's very difficult and very frustrating.
I've seen it. How many programs were made on television?
What?
Just a minute.
Oh, there was this one we did 6, but what they did was they put it on and in the slot where they do eggheads. And I think somebody who commissioned it thought, oh, it's a quiz show. We'll take that quiz off and we'll put it on for a week. And we did it every night of the week. It isn't, it's a light entertainment show. It should have gone about 9:30 at night when they have I Got News for You and things like that on. And so we did it, and they went incredibly well. But then, you know, at the end of the week or the 2 weeks, it was finished. And I said, well, they said, well, it's been a huge success. I said, well, do you think we can now get it onto an evening slot? And they said, no, because the commissioning editors for evening shows are different to the commissioning editors for daytime. And daytime finishes at 6:30. And they're not going to commission a show that their rivals who do the... So there's all kinds of bureaucracy that goes on. I mean, you have to know it and work within the system and find a way to get things going. And I've been working the system all these years, and somehow I've managed to keep working. In fact, I suppose it's because I've done so lots of different things. But I haven't, and I just want to say now, because I remember going out to Hong Kong, and Derek Nimmo, my friend, introduced me to a great friend of his called David Tang. He wasn't Sir David then. And he entertained us. Was it the China Club?
Yes.
And I'll never forget, I met this charming man. He was so courteous. He was so, had such style. And it was so flattering. I was overwhelmed, and I've never forgotten it. And David, to me, you are unique in one sense. You were born into one culture, speaking one language, and you are now embraced another culture, speaking a different language. But you've not only acquired the language, but you've actually acquired the accent of that language. And I've never met anybody, because I've got a great ear for voices and dialects and so forth, I've never met anybody who's ever achieved that. It's amazing.
Well, it's like you going down to Glasgow, still speaking the public school accent. But before we end, I have to tell you a secret, and you've got to indulge me, because ever since I met you, I have been telling a joke that involves your name. And it goes as follows, that Nicholas Parsons was the quizmaster, and there were 3 candidates, an American, an Englishman, and a Chinaman. And Nicholas Parsons says, finger on the buzzer, 10 points if you can answer both parts of the question. First of all, you've got to complete the sentence, and then you've got to spell the word. So Nicholas Parsons says, "Oh, MacDonald had a," and the American was very quick. He says, "Oh, no problem. Oh, MacDonald had a ranch, R-A-N-C-H. And Nicholas Parsons said, "I'm sorry, that is incorrect." And the Englishman went, boom. And he said, "Oh, you got it wrong." He said, "Oh, MacDonald had an estate, E-S-T-A-T-E. And Nicholas Parsons said, "I'm terribly sorry, but now, Mr. Wong, can you take over the question?" And he said, "Oh, yes." He said, "How do you complete the sentence?" He said, "Oh, MacDonald had a lamb." No, sorry. "Oh, MacDonald had a farm." Sorry, I got it wrong, sorry. "Oh, MacDonald had a farm." He said, "Very good. Now for 10 points, can you spell it?" He says, "Yes. E-I-E-I-O. I'm sorry, how stupid of me to fuck that up. But I've been taking your name in vain. But listen, ladies and gentlemen.
You've just reminded me of one of my favorite stories, which is absolutely true, concerned with quizzes. It was when I was doing Sale of the Century. And I used to go and meet the 3 contestants beforehand to put them at their ease and see if I got the pressure on later. And I used to chat to them, and I had the cards, and I said to the first one, I said, it says here that you're a school teacher, you come from so and so and so forth. And she said, yes. I turned to the second one. This is an absolute true story. And I said, according to my thing here, you're a pawnbroker. He said, well, Nicholas, I'm not really a pawnbroker. He said, I've got barriers down the east end of London. You see, I used to be a pawnbroker. That's why I put it down, because I thought it covers a multitude of sins, as you might say. But no, I've got these barrows, you know. It's all the family business. Everyone has a different barrow. It's all money, all cash in the back of the hand, you know, nothing declared. Do you understand what I mean? And he said, well, I thought, I can't come on television and say I've got a cash business, nothing declared. So I thought I'll use the pawnbroker, covers a multitude of sins, you see, right? And he went on like this for a bit. And he suddenly said, I'm talking too much. Turned to the third contestant. He said, and what do you do for a living? He said, I'm an income tax inspector.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in thanking Nicholas Parsons?
Thank you very much.